Hi, I'm Kevin Golden, partner and member of the James Moore Manufacturing Team. Today, we're joined by Sara Swafford, who's also a member of the James Moore Manufacturing Team and leader in our fractional CFO services. In manufacturing, there is a lot of moving parts which means a lot of focus on and a lot to measure, right? So a lot of manufacturers, they keep track of this, maybe some plant level metrics, equipment effectiveness, downtime, things like that. But then they stop there, right? So today with Sara, we're going to discuss other performance metrics that leadership and other team members should be tracking that impact not only the output, what you're producing, but also financial results. But first of all, Sara, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Happy to be here. I love talking all things manufacturing, so it's always fun to, lift the curtain behind the scenes.
Sure. Well, we're glad to have you. To get us started, data is in abundance like never before. I mean, we've got data to track everything from things on your smartwatches, your phones, to in your business, and multiple ways probably to track it, right? So there's no lack of data is what I'm getting at, right? So from your experience as, fractional CFO and being in and around a lot of manufacturers, right? What metrics, first of all, are most manufacturers tracking? And then maybe some of those plant level metrics, but then maybe why is that simply not enough? Why should they be tracking more? So maybe let's start with what they're looking at and maybe what they should be looking at.
Yeah, sure. Good question. Like you mentioned, most manufacturers are great at tracking the basics. Plant level things like throughput, scrap rate, downtime. They even get into the labor efficiency metric. They're all incredibly important, but they live in those operational silos. They live at the plant level. And they are not connecting what's happening at that operational level to what the impact is financially. So we're missing things on the financial side, and a big one that's commonly missing is on the supply chain side, measurements in that area. Once you connect those operational metrics to the plant level, the financial metrics to the plant level metrics, you're really getting a much bigger picture of the full business performance. You're able to tie things together and really understand your contribution margin down to the product level, really get deeper into your inventory turns, really understand your customer level profitability. Tying those together really adds a lot of insight into what's really happening in your business.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. You mentioned for a second, one thing that stuck out me a little bit is you mentioned silos. So data is in abundance. We've got it. Maybe we even start tracking the right, metrics or the KPIs or whatnot. But then I feel like sometimes those can still be siloed. How we treat those, how we look at those can be, okay, great. In this silo, here's how we're performing on our turnover. Here's how we're performing on our output, our throughput, or whatever it may be. But how do you prevent that from happening, from it just being a bunch of independent metrics to then, like you said, working together, not only operationally, but then tying back financially?
Yep. It's probably one of the most common things that I've run into in my life in manufacturing is a lot of manufacturers are running on legacy ERP systems. It's one of the last things they think about when they're growing business and they are focused on production. But what it has resulted in as the business grows and these old systems are in place, they're patching together multiple systems. There's manual processes in between. I've seen companies that spend weeks pulling data from different platforms just to be able to close the books. And so, like we said, it continues to be siloed because that financial system, it's so far in the past. By the time they're able to pull all the data, it's not meaningful to business. So that's creating the blind spots. And so purchasing, production, finance, they're not working off the same data in the real time. And what is that creating is that they're not spotting delays in real time. Supply chain information is flawed and they're not able to better manage their inventory levels. Forecasting, forget it. It's one of the hardest things to do when you're patching together these siloed systems. I had a client once that had a backlog issue. They didn't understand why they were constantly on back order. They assumed it was caused by staffing. So once we were able to connect the production and that supply chain and financial data, we realized that it was inconsistent supplier times, lead times, and we were able to tie that data together. So it's a process, that is for darn sure. But when those systems are siloed, the decision making is becoming reactive instead of proactive.
Mhm.
And so once you can pull that together, you're able to steer the business to a bit more clarity.
Yeah. Well, and one thing you mentioned in there too is one thing all manufacturers can understand is timeliness, right? I mean, whether it's when we order our product, how we get things through and ultimately deliver, right? We're
Mhm.
all working on some sort of timeline there. If we don't, we're losing customers, we're losing relationships and so forth. So time, the old adage, time is money, is especially true in a manufacturing plant. So I think what resonated with me too is not only, hey, we're potentially siloing this data or not working off the same set of data to make good informed decisions, but we're not getting that timely. We're not able to then make decisions timely. Therefore, we're costing ourselves money and opportunity in real time, and we don't even know it if all these kind of connections are not made between what's happening in different departments, what's happening on the floor, what's happening on the financials, what's happening in management, and working together in that way. So, yeah, no time. I would say timeliness, and then accuracy, right? So,
Great.
um, in again going back to kind of your experience and so forth, is you said, hey, I've seen where they were patching together these systems and all. Hey, I had a client that had to put together all these different silos and try to connect them. Was that Is that common amongst most manufacturers? Like, for instance, I mean, that was a client that you had an experience with, but what I'm
Mhm.
asking is that really that common in manufacturing that you see that a lot much, or is that kind of, well, that was a worst case scenario of a client where they just had everything not working, all working independently and not working together?
Well, I've been doing this for 23 years, and I have encountered the patching together more times than I have not. And it's typical. It's very typical with these small to medium sized manufacturers, and they're growing so fast, and they're doing everything they can. And like I said, it's oftentimes the lower priority. And what I often hear from leaders is even though they're patching together these systems,
Mm.
they're sometimes drowning in data because if they're working with three different systems, even if it is siloed, they are drowning in data, but they're really starving for insight. And so they can patch it together, they can close the books, and they can provide these plant level metrics, and sometimes they can provide profitability metrics, but they're tracking dozens of KPIs, but they're still flying blind because they're not tying it all together. So it seems like a big, bite thing to fight off, to get rid of your ERP system, bring it all together. And that's certainly not what I'm saying, but it is making sure that you're measuring the right things,
Right.
and that you're pulling it together to really understand what is driving the profitability of your business, and pinpointing any inefficiencies. So really thinking through, yes, I have 5 different systems, but what is the right thing that's driving my business?
Right. And I think another way to put that is, I've got all this data, I got all these systems, I got all these things I can measure and do, but what value is that providing me? What insight is that giving me? Because on this show and in general, we're big about, if it's not valuable, why are we doing it? Right?
Right.
Why are we measuring something just for the sake of measuring it if it's not providing us some sort of valuable insight or helping us make a better decision that provides more value to our
Mhm.
people, to our bottom line, to us as a company?
Mhm.
Well, absolutely. I think a way to wrap that up is, hey, if it's not providing valuable data, valuable insight that then helps you make a better informed decision and increase value in your company, then you just need to revisit that. You need to relook at
Yep.
that and what that may mean. And maybe something isn't connected, or maybe you're just simply looking at the wrong set of data, the wrong metrics.
Right.
So,
I
uh,
I always sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, you're fine.
I was
Um,
looking at it, it has to be connected, timely, and actionable.
Yeah.
So those three things together.
Yep. Yep. Um, Go back to what you said a few minutes ago. Supply chain. Okay. Everyone talks about supply in manufacturing. You've got labor issues. You got supply chain now, tariffs. We won't even go there for right now, but you've got all these kind of buzzwords, if you will, that everyone talks about. Okay, supply chain, supply chain. You've got to, measure that. We've got to do better at that. Do you have insight into what that looks like? So, again, whether it's on the phone, whether it's clients, prospects at some sort of conference, everywhere we go, we hear supply chain is one of the top issues in manufacturing, right? So if it's a top issue, it makes sense to me that you have a way to measure that. You have a way to have that be very visible, right? And
Mm-hmm.
stay ahead of that if that's what's causing a lot of your issues, right? So, in your opinion, what do you recommend when you ask, a manufacturer, or we get to working with one and they don't have visibility in their supply chain, or they don't have a good way to measure that? What do you recommend for manufacturers to gain that visibility into their supply chain and help stay ahead of those supply chain related issues?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you said it. Supply chain is, you hear it so much, and it being an issue in the business, and that's usually because there's a lack of visibility into it. It's, most manufacturers understand the on-time delivery of their suppliers. They often understand, how many days of inventory they have on hand. But there's lead time variability that is an incredibly significant factor that you think that you're going to get it average 30 days, but if your customer is expecting it in a very consistent manner, that lead time variability is incredibly important to measure. Fill rates from your suppliers, but you also need the internal metrics. Sometimes that lack of visibility is because you're not really measuring how often or costly it is when your production is delayed because of your supply chain. We're all very reactive in manufacturing. It's very, very typical, but once you really start measuring that cost of production delays due to supply chain shortages, variability in lead time, it's very impactful as you push back on your suppliers. There's always the opportunity to expect more of your suppliers and help drive their performance to where they are true partners in your business. And it's really important, based on my experience, that companies really evaluate their 3PL partners. Brokers are a dirty word in freight and manufacturing sometimes, but a good 3PL partnership is incredibly impactful. And it's not always just based on cost, but it's reliability, it's communication. Do they have the ability to share data with you where your shipments are both outbound and inbound? Sometimes the cheapest option is not the best option, and it costs more on missed delivery.
Well, and I like the fact that you mentioned a lot of different metrics there. I often think of that as, hey, metrics are all your data points that then, again, what value, what insight does it give you into that? So I like the fact that you mentioned not only, well, what does it cost to make X or to provide that you need from your vendors and from your supply chain, but it's evaluating, how is that communication? Seen many times where simply having open and frequent conversations with their third party providers then can really increase and help them gain insight into what you're struggling with and what you're trying to accomplish, and vice versa, to then make that better or come up with an alternative solution or help you determine, hey, this provider is going to be a better option than maybe the low cost provider out there of what you're looking for. So I like it that you mentioned it's not just a dollar amount. They all have a dollar consequence when we have delays and things like that. But it's not just a dollar amount of that. It's overall, that overall relationship, that overall all those metrics you're looking at in your supply chain. Are they helping you out, or is that what's causing those delays that then is preventing you from operating or manufacturing at an optimal performance level or capacity level? So no,
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Kind of looking at that holistic view of your supply chain, not just a few metrics, cost being one of those. So
It's really about finding that balance between cost and control is what
right.
it comes down to. And so when you have the right data, you can make smarter trade-offs that not only drive better service from your suppliers, but can also drive margin. So it's really finding a balance between those two.
Yeah, Yeah, I guess you could call that the quality of your supply chain, right? That it's a
Hmm.
mixture of all those factors to say how good is this supply chain, not just from a cost, but the holistic approach. So yeah, I
Hmm.
agree. Thanks for sharing. Um, so far these all a lot of great suggestions, but I think a lot of times when we're having these types of conversations on a podcast like this, or someone we invite on here, or we're talking in the community, a lot of times we're talking to the business owner themselves, the CFO, the C-suite people, key management, maybe key leaders in that organization, right? But we all know that as businesses as a whole, and especially as manufacturers, we're nothing if we don't have the people surrounded by us to help us carry out our mission, our goals, and everything, right? Labor, constant issue across all industries. Manufacturing is no different. So, how do you, as a fractional CFO, or when you're talking with those kind of key management and leaders, then help them trickle that down, what we're talking about, high level and all that, trickle down that mindset into others? Because I would imagine you've got to get buy-in at some level, whether it's understanding what they do and how it makes a difference in the organization. You've got to get some level of buy-in. Otherwise, again, you're kind of silent. People are either working in the opposite or a different direction, and sometimes unknowingly doing so. Or I guess what I'm saying is, how do you just trickle down that mindset to help employees help you create value through what they do every day, clocking in, day out on an operational level?
Hmm. And that's really where communication and context really matter as a leader. When employees understand how their role impacts not only financial, but operational performance, even at the lowest level, when they understand it, they become more invested in the outcome. Um, that may be by tying performance metrics to the employee level to those measurements. But really, just the more you can communicate and more help them understand how their specific role impacts performance, they really do become more invested. I mean, for example, instead of just telling a team to reduce scrap, show them how reducing scrap would improve margins and enable the company to reinvest in a bonus program or new equipment. Those impacts that the employees at the lowest level may feel, when they can tie it together to something that may impact them in their personal life, it can make a significant impact. And so when the data is made more relevant to their daily work, people begin to see themselves the bigger part of the picture.
Yeah, I like that too, because um, people generally like being tied to something, that aligns with their views, their goals. How is this?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's how is it going to help me, but how's it also
Mhm.
going to help the greater good? So I think
Mhm.
having them understand, oh yeah, go back to your example, reducing scrap, that allows us to be able to make more of our products and less. Maybe it's a holistic approach, less byproducts that are harmful to the environment, right? Or hey, tie that to me financially. Hey, now I have an incentive program that can
Mhm.
support me financially, and I can make more by making the right choices. And here's how that ties to what I do day in, day out, right? Some way creating that value and that helping that resonate with them onto here's the bigger picture. It's not just how it affects you and what you're doing in that moment, but here's the ripple effect of that as a company, as maybe the end users who you're serving, who you're selling to, how it impacts them, as well as the individual, how it impacts them financially or otherwise on their day-to-day job. I mean, even reinvesting, like you said, being able to take that and say, well, great, with those savings, we can reinvest in equipment and technology that now makes your job even better, and makes you be able to perform at even higher capacity and more efficiently. Now you're probably going to be happier about that. So I like that of having it, and again, it being a conversation, not so much,
Mhm.
hey, we need you to reduce scrap, pound it over your head, we need you to do this or that, but here's that kind of that why behind it, and how that's going to make not only the company better, but then you probably are going to benefit from it as well, directly and indirectly. So.
Mhm. Right.
And I would imagine with that, I just think of, oh my gosh, that's a whole culture mindset, right? Like culture, we have that open mindset. We can have these conversations from key C-suite management folks down to the everyday, worker that's working on the floor, to everyone in between, right? So I would imagine to do that, you've also got to have a pretty sturdy, pretty good culture, right? So
Mhm.
if you don't have that currently, though, or maybe you're working on that, how can a manufacturing company then build that culture of accountability on, hey, this is not only how it impacts me, but how it impacts the company as a whole? That mindset, that data driven mindset to make the right decisions on the floor each and every day. How can you, what's some recommendations you give there on building that mindset and that culture to support overall making the best decisions for everyone?
It's really it's really starts with transparency and consistency. Leaders have to model the behavior. They have to be willing to share those metrics often, educate why they're important. And something that I have found a lot of manufacturers are slow to adopt is celebrating wins that are tied to that data. Being transparent is one thing, and holding people's feet to the fire on results, but you got to celebrate the wins too, and that is really a big piece of driving a culture around accountability, and owning the results and it being owned all the way to the shop floor. Dashboards and KPIs really shouldn't just live in the boardroom and at the executive level. They should be visible on the production floor. They should be talked about in team huddles. Folks should be able to ask questions on what they mean and how they can impact them. And back to consistency, and when they see the same metrics every single day, and not constantly changing what's important to the business, they understand how they're measured and they can really start driving their behavior. So, putting visual management onto the shop floor is huge. Having short but regular meetings to tie everything together and again celebrate those wins are some really good first steps in driving that culture.
Well, and I like how you summed that up with transparency, right? As a business owner myself, also I know that there's times where, well, everyone can't know everything about everything, right?
Right.
Sometimes it can potentially do harm, or it can be confusing or whatnot. So how do you find that you balance that? Hey, we want to be transparent, so you understand the big picture and what we're trying to do and how what you're doing impacts that. But at the same time, and I want you to be open to ask questions because, hey, we want that feedback. We want it to be better. But at the same time, I, as a business owner, if I shared every single idea that came through my mind with someone, it'd be like, well, why would you go in that direction? Well, I don't know. Business owners, that's why they call them entrepreneurs. They're curious by nature,
Yes.
right? They venture off, and it doesn't mean they're going to run in all those directions, but that's what goes through their mind. So how do you find that you balance that between maybe things that do need to stay inside the boardroom, at least for a certain period of time, versus, hey, this is the right time to share this with our people, share this with everyone, with our all our employees to know, to get their buy-in, to get their vision, to help them be a part of that solution for the
Right.
future and what you're trying to accomplish, rather than, no, I'm afraid we're going to confuse folks, or send them down the wrong pathway, or cause a lot more harm than good, I'll say.
Yeah. And not even confuse them. I've run into owners that were concerned that folks would do the backwards math and realized how much they were personally making, and that honestly is probably the number one reason that a lot of manufacturing owners have not shared as many financial metrics, is because it made them very uncomfortable. But you don't need to share every detail of the P&L, and you don't need to share that bottom line. But once you can establish what the most impactful measurements are to your business,
Mhm.
and explain how it's impactful, and again tie it back to what winning this measurement means to the business and winning this measurement means to you, employee. The shift in the mindset is powerful. It really changes from compliance to engagement. They view their jobs more as a value creation. So it's not about showing the bottom line and what everybody, the owner is taking home, but it is being consistent about those measurements that are most impactful to the business, and just being open about them and being willing to help folks understand why it means a lot to the business. It really just builds trust and alignment.
Sure. And I like, I think when you say open too, we as owners, as leaders, also need to be open to what that may mean as far as how that may change, because I think, uh, kind of jokingly say, especially in the manufacturing floor, you want to know if a process is broken, just go ask the person doing it, right? Go ask them, the one who's assembling or doing that. They'll tell you
Mhm.
exactly where there's inefficiencies or what's wrong, or at least what a problem is, right?
Mhm.
So again, if you want someone's opinion, be careful, they'll give it to you. You have to be
Yeah.
open as a leader that, yeah, they're going to. And yeah, they may have some really great ideas in there that make a lot of sense. That great, we should dive deeper into that. And maybe that ends up shaping and being a little bit different than perhaps what you expected whenever you laid out your vision, when you laid out your why behind this, what we do and all. So I think the flexibility there to be open on both ends, the people receiving it, but then in turn, once they receive that and provide feedback, which we want, we're building a great culture there, being open to what are you going to do with that, what that may mean for your organization now or in the future, on how you evolve and continue to change and grow. So I think that's probably a two-way street there on transparency and being flexible. Um,
Mhm.
so
Absolutely.
with all of these things we've talked about so far, between metrics that we should be tracking that are typically tracked, what happens when they don't, when we're kind of siloed and all these different compartments as opposed to working together both operationally and financially. We talked about
Mhm.
culture and transparency. You've mentioned several times, well, in the past I've seen this, or I've worked with this organization or this manufacturer like this. Do you have any maybe examples, success or horror stories maybe of companies that have done this well and not so well? I mean, not mentioning any names, but just in general scenarios of kind of like what you gave a little bit earlier of, yeah, this is where they implemented this and it was wildly successful or maybe even fell flat on their face.
Mhm. Sure. I've worked with a manufacturer that really had zero visibility into their product level profitability.
Hmm.
They priced everything based on their gut feel. The founders, I know what I'm doing. I know what I can price it at, but it was not data driven. So once we helped build them a cost model, which included an overhead allocation, what the true labor costs were after doing time studies, they realized that nearly, almost half of their SKUs weren't profitable at all, which kind of mind mind blowing for a founder for sure. So, following that analysis, they completely adjusted their pricing strategy. They had so much fear about how their customers would receive that. But what it turned into is they were able to trim underperforming products. They were able to actually fire some customers that were never going to accept the right price for this product. And so they were able to trim that. They really were able to double down on those high margin SKUs. And within a year, their margin improved, their EBITDA improved by about 10%. So it was a very impactful exercise for them and very eye opening. And on the flip side, I've seen companies ignore those insights. Regardless of how many times you can put the data in front of them, that gut always seems to take over. They continue to operate in silos, and they price continue on those legacy assumptions. And eventually those blind spots definitely catch up. And especially when growth has been masking underlying inefficiencies. So
Sure.
you've got to pay attention to the data.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. So we've been talking for a good while now. And I know as we kind of get a little bit closer to the end here, I've really just got a final question. If a lot of what our listeners are hearing on this podcast, on this YouTube series is, and it resonates them, maybe they're an owner, maybe they're just a key leader in their manufacturing company, but it resonates what they're hearing. Hey, I hear you. I think we should start doing some of that. But they just don't know where to start. I mean, maybe they're not doing any of this. Maybe they're kind of like the one you just mentioned. Hey, I've just been running off my gut and what I kind of feels right to me, but I know I really need to take a hold of it. But it just seems so overwhelming. There's so many metrics, there's so many things to work on, so many changes we probably need to make, but you can't do it all at once. Where should they start? What should their mindset be? Where should they focus to maybe begin down that path to gaining greater visibility, greater transparency, better culture, and so forth?
Yep. It seems like a lot to bite off. But if you really just start with that baseline assessment, ask yourself, what data are you using today? How quickly are you getting it? And what decisions is it supporting, or is it not supporting decisions? And then from there, identify one or two gaps that are, creating the most friction in your business, or one or two gaps where somebody asks you a question and you just cannot answer it. Really just do that baseline assessment. It might be the inventory visibility, product costing. You're having a really hard time forecasting, but just pick one area that you believe in your business is going to give you the biggest ROI. And then just start with a simple framework on how to start measuring it. And then it expands quicker than you would expect. If you just start small, what are the biggest blind spots? It really does expand from there on, oh gosh, I didn't think of this either or that. And if it feels overwhelming, there's business intelligence tools like Power BI, there's Tableau. There's a number of different options where you can slice and dice your data. It's easier than you thought. It's a lot cleaner than your spreadsheets are, but it allows you to really quickly visualize gaps in your business without doing a full ERP system overhaul. It's a heck of a lot easier than a lot of people expect.
Right. Yeah, I guess you got to start somewhere, right? So if we start somewhere, and even if it's just small steps, maybe we're better off tomorrow than we were today. So I like that. Start somewhere, get your mind around that, work on that, then start on the next. And of course, if any of our listeners are listening today, Sara, we appreciate you being on the show. We appreciate your expertise and sharing your insight and what you've seen and how you've been able to help others. Of course, if any of our listeners have those needs, any of this does resonate with you, feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Sara, myself, others that we can help you with where to start down that path to greater visibility, greater transparency, and more importantly, greater value for your company. So thank you all, and we'll see you all next month.
Thank you.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.